Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Project channel here at YouTube. Welcome to, of course, this Friday's album review. As you can see from the thumbnail and, of course, the title, you can tell that eventually I was going to cover this album on here. That's, of course, is the newest and 21st studio album from, of course, British rock legends. That's, of course, is Whoosh from Deep Purple. And of course, this was released on August 7th through, of course, the labels such as earMusic and Edel, Germany. So, now, when it comes to, of course, that is the monolith. That is Deep Purple. And when I use the word monolith, that is just to describe of how big and how much of an impact this band has definitely made, especially throughout all of its eras. At least that also even includes the first incarnation of Deep Purple, that being the Mach 1 era lineup, which of course featured Rod Evans and Nick Simper, and that spanned at least from 1968's Shades of Deep Purple to, of course, 1969's self-titled album. But it definitely comes down to, of course, when it comes to at least the impact that Deep Purple made, really began with, of course, with the Mach 2 lineup. But while definitely the album Concerto for Group and Orchestra was the first of the Mach 2 lineup, it was with, of course, the studio album and also Deep Purple's fourth record, Deep Purple and Rock, in 1970, that really just kick-started this band and basically ushered in a whole new era. I mean, just along with, of course, Black Sabbath's first two albums and, of course, the very first Uriah Heep, and even in some cases, Led Zeppelin 3, these were definitely one of the albums that for sure helped usher in that sort of hard rock, and at times especially the beginning metal genre as well, especially the heavy metal and so on. Of course, Deep Purple and Rock also laid the foundations for the blueprint for, of course, that would become speed metal as well in the 1980s. I mean, just from the riffs from Richie Blackmore. However, the lineup here is definitely, I would call the Mach 7th lineup, which of course also uses for sure Steve Morse, who of course debuted in 1996 with, of course, Perpendicular. So definitely different guitar player here, but again, it's again at least same band. But again, when also talking about Deep Purple, you also then even think of at least the other eras as well, besides the Mach 2 era albums. Again, just like Deep Purple and Rock, Fireball, Machine Head, and of course then the classic live record that is Made in Japan, and of course then the final studio album, at least the first version of the Mach 2 era lineup, which again ended in 1973 with Who Do We Think We Are, or Who Do You Think We Are, I think as that be titled, who knows. Again, 1973, and of course then beginning with, of course, the Mach 3 and Mach 4 lineups. Mach 3 being, of course, the David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes era, with, of course, then, and with Richie Blackmore beginning with, of course, with, again, one of other Deep Purple's biggest records, that being Burn, of course, then ending with, of course, that same year with, of course, the follow-up record, Stormbringer, which then Richie Blackmore left and started up Rainbow. But then he was eventually what was replaced with Tommy Bolin, and that led to the only Mach 4 lineup record of Deep Purple, that of course being Come Taste the Band, which is technically, it's people are, let's just say, we're very divided on that record. Some love it, some hate it, but it definitely was the final Deep Purple album for a while there, up until at least when the Mach 2 era lineup got back together in 1984 and released one of the what is considered one of the greatest comeback albums of all time. That, of course, being Perfect Strangers. And of course, that lasted for at least with the House of Blue Light in 1987. And of course, for a while there, because of the tensions between Ian Gillan and Ritchie Blackmore, which definitely were kind of beginning the show itself, at least from Who Do You Think We Are in 1973, which led to at least the breakup of the Mach 2 era lineup. And of course, that also then led into the only Mach 5 era lineup. That, of course, is the only album with, of course, Joel and Turner, which, of course, Ritchie Blackmore just decided to dug up from Rainbow. Anyways, for Slaves and Masters from 1990. The less said about that album, the better, at least for this video. And, of course, then re-resurrecting the Mach 2 era lineup again for, of course, which would be the final album of the Mach 2 era lineup. That, of course, was 1993's The Battle Rages On. And of course, again, as with a lot of the tensions just between Ritchie Blackmore and Ian Gillan, that's of course just led to Ritchie Blackmore leaving and just leaving the Deep Purple name to at least two guys such as Roger Glover, Ian Gillan, Ian Pace, and John Lord, and that's when they introduced Dixie Dregg's guitar player, Steve Morse, and that's when we were then given 1996's Perpendicular, and this Mach 6 lineup only lasted at least until 1999's Abandoned, which, again, that album along with Perpendicular were my introductions to Deep Purple, and those albums were played a lot. I mean, I definitely have at least some nostalgic memories for those two albums. Again, I also should be pointing out that the very first taste of the Mach 2 era lineup was Machine Head, with, of course, the opening track, Highway Star, which is definitely considered, again, one of the classic metal tracks, at least in the 1970s, and really one of the earliest metal songs. Again, I'll leave it along with other Deep Purple tracks from that album being Smoke on the Water. But then, of course, that Mach 6 lineup will only last, again, until 1999's Abandoned, when John Lord would then eventually retire from the band, and that's when ushering in the Mach 7th lineup, which is at least lasts until this album here, which, of course, introducing none other than veteran keyboard player Don Airey, who was... I already talked about Don Airey a couple of times. I mean, I covered the very first Smack Shaker Group album on this channel anyways, which, again, he played the keyboards on that album, and then, of course, worked with Ozzy, and even Judas Priest as well, and, of course, even Rainbow as well on Difficult to Cure, just at least for 4 examples. So he's worked with plenty of artists, especially Ritchie Blackmore and Roger Glover anyways, and Rainbow, so, of course, it was a no-brainer for who the band was going to pick as John Lord's replacement. Of course, sadly, John Lord is no longer alive, passing away in 2012. Definitely one of the definitely a loss when it came to, of course, the history of rock, and just again, just a legendary musician, and one of the forefathers as well up there. Just a it was definitely a loss of the old guard. But that's where we then lead in, which again lasted for at least 5 records, basically. 5 records at least for the Mach 7th lineup here. Again, with, of course, beginning with 2003's Bananas, and then leading into here, which is 2020's Whoosh. So there you go. There's your little backstory, at least as much as I can go through, at least of the backstory for, of course, again, just the detailing of the eras. I mean, again... speaking again of just albums there from Deep Purple, I mean, you have Monolith Records there, but where does that lead Whoosh here? Again, the newest studio album. This is even the 3rd full-length album of Deep Purple, working at well-known, well-regarded as well producer Bob Ezrin, who's worked with countless artists from either Alice Cooper to Kiss to, of course, even Pink Floyd. But here's Deep Purple, which again, their beginnings of working with Bob Ezrin began in 2013's Now What, and then of course led into 2017's Infinite, and here we are, of course, with Whoosh. Alright, This is where I guess we finally just get into the review, and there's a lot of stuff I could definitely talk about. I mean, just from upon getting this album last Tuesday of the previous week. That whole week, was just me spending all my nights and days just absorbing every bit of this album. And God, I mean, this album, of course, is even on the back cover, instead of just listing tracks 1 through at least to track 13 or 12, instead we are just given by at least the concept of Act 1 and Act 2, and that's where apparently gives you that there's at least 2 halves to this record, even though technically I think every bit of these halves all have a way of just really blending into where it just works within this album. It actually does have a way of just definitely working and really blend in with the album, instead of really feeling like, wow, this is definitely the first half and this really does feel like a second half. Instead, it doesn't feel like that. Everything just has a way of just blending together and works off each other. It just works within this album. Even though not every song on here is at least a winner, there's at least about 2 songs here I'm not very much too crazy about, but I'll get to that. Let's definitely just list off a lot of the songs on here. I mean, as part of Act 1, there's at least 6 songs for at least Act 1 here, and that goes from the very first track which kicks off the album, and it was definitely one of the first lead singles for this album. That's, of course, is Throw My Bones. Then, of course, get to track number 2 with Drop the Weapon, and track number 3 with We're All the Same in the Dark, with track number 4 being Nothing at All, track number 5 being No Need to Shout, and track number 6 being Step by Step. Then, of course, then we get to Act 2. There's about at least 6 songs for this half here. And, of course, then, which begins with track number 1 here being What the What, track number 2 here being The Long Way Road, and, of course, track number 3 of Act 2 being The Power of the Moon. Track number 4 of Act 2 being Remission Possible. And then, of course, track number 5 of Act 2 is, of course, Man Alive. One of the other singles from this album. I think this one and Nothing at All were definitely the Throw My Bones, Nothing at All, and Man Alive were definitely the 3 lead singles for this album. And, of course, then finally what ends Act number 2 is none other than a re-recording from, of course, the very first Deep Purple album, Shades of Deep Purple. That's, of course, is none other than And the Address. And, of course, then, as far as when it comes to at least the CD copies, there's at least a bonus track that's titled Dancing in My Sleep. And it's, of course, again, no number to it, but it definitely would be track 13 on the CD copy. So there we go. There's the songs here. As far as when it comes to highlights and what I really can talk about, I mean, just from the album as a whole, for those who are even beginning to go into this album and are expecting anything that resembles any of the eras of Deep Purple, will definitely be taken back. I mean, for me, who hasn't been very familiar with a lot of the albums after 1999's Abandoned. I think that was released in 98, but it could have been 1999. I mean, it's been that long ago for me, and when it comes to at least nostalgia as well, and the whole memory of that record, and by the time when I was born during, definitely beginning my early childhood, and just hearing, again, those 2 records, it definitely, it could have been 1999, but I think it was 98 though, for Abandoned. Anyways, I digress. I mean, me not being so familiar with the albums after that, of course, again, the Mach 7th lineup of Deep Purple, I haven't been so I really can't make too much of a judge on whether or not how this album sounds different from any of the albums after 1998's or 1999 Abandoned. Only you who is familiar with those albums can probably let me know how different this album is from that. But as far as when it comes to at least maybe even trying to compare this to at least of the previous 2 albums of Deep Purple working with Bob Ezrin, again with 2013's Now What and 2017's Infinite, not very much sure, even though I've heard at least a couple of samples and so on. The difference with this album, as far as me, and again, I'm only basing my judgment judgment off of the very other Deep Purple albums I've heard. Again, beginning with, of course, maybe the Mach 1 era lineup, or of course, again, the classic Mach 2 and Mach 3 lineup stuff, and Mach 4, again, with, again, albums such as Deep Purple and Rock, Fireball, Machine Head, fucking Burn, Stormbringer, Come Taste the Band, of course, then the reunion era albums from the 1980s, again, with the Perfect Strangers, The House of Blue Light, and of course then Slaves and Masters and The Battle Rages On, of course then to Perpendicular and Abandon. This album is definitely very much is different. It definitely has a very laid-back feel, which has already been at least represented in some other reviews that I've heard, at least I have read. I haven't watched any other reviews. The only review I have ever watched was Martin Popoff's review for this album. But every one of them, they all definitely have said this is very much a laid-back feeling album. And that's definitely true. But that doesn't mean that there are at least some good examples of being of them at least displaying at least a little bit of that classic rock feel and a little bit of that heaviness. Here and there, there is a way of some of that has a way of creeping in to this album for sure. But as far as similarities to, of course, the Steve Morse era stuff, again, with Perpendicular and Abandon, there are some similarities on this album that definitely you can make comparisons to Perpendicular and Abandon. But again, just less heavy. And again, that also could be due to, of course, Bob Ezrin's production, which is very clean. And it's not nearly as similar to, of course, the likes of Martin Birch. Definitely rest in peace. Definitely, when comparing at least, or even the albums that Roger Glover was producing for Deep Purple, when comparing Bob Ezrin, he does have a distinct production. He's got for sure a signature production style, and as far as mixing, and you definitely get that. The one of the thing, and eventually I'll get to my, of course, for sure, slight complaints, at least of this album, but that's not really much with any of the songs here. I do have some highlights, some favorites of mine, and it definitely has also ways of definitely giving you the good idea of how varied that this album definitely is when it comes to at least the very many styles that is presented on this album. I mean, for one, it's not a highlight for me, but the opening track, for sure, Throw My Bones, has a symphonic feel. And it definitely has a way of, and when it comes to at least the mixing and production, that does really make itself so apparent on this track. Again, it's not very organ heavy. It's very symphony very heavy in some ways. And again, it's not a heavy track. It's got a decent vibe to it. Definitely very commercial-like and definitely modern for sure. I mean, good God. This is enough that would be used for like a commercial, or even, for example, even a film score be used in a movie. For some reason, I almost even think of James Bond. I don't know why, but that's just the way I kind of give it off. But that's what the whole feel of at least the very first track. But when we get to, of course, songs such as Drop the Weapon and We're All the Same in the Dark, these two songs definitely kind of definitely start to inject a little bit of that rock feel to this album, that classic rock feel to the album. Though again, not as heavy. I mean, these two are both catchy songs, actually. I know Martin Popoff kind of stated that Drop the Weapon is one of the songs he kind of called to be the weakest song on the album. But I actually I think Throw My Bones could very well be one of the weakest songs on the album. Just for the fact that I don't know whether or not it's different to have an album open up like that. But I mean, when you have at least known for a band like Deep Purple, definitely they were known for opening up their records with at least an energetic rocker. They were known for that. But a song like Throw My Bones does it in a way, it definitely has a different feel, and it isn't completely, energetic. And it definitely, I mean, it does add to the ambition of it. I mean, at the age that these guys are in, it does reflect off of what they're going through and what they are wanting to do. It does reflect that. I mean, there's also plenty of proggy feel on this one. That's another one of the things that people have definitely pointed out with this album, is that it's also very proggy. But not nearly as proggy as something like King Crimson or Yes. I mean, there might be some similarities to King Crimson, but maybe just a little bit more rock, a little more, at least slightly more on the hard rock comparison to at least compared to at least something like King Crimson. But there is definitely some comparison to even Pink Floyd here and there, all the song "The Power of the Moon." But again, I do dig the songs "Drop the Weapon" and We're All the Same in the Dark." "We're All the Same in the Dark" has a nice bluesy feel to it. It's probably the closest you might get to at least a slightly classic Deep Purple feel, though not heavy. Not heavy. Very similar to maybe the second track off of Machine Head for some reason. That's what it tends to remind me a little bit. I don't know, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of that with We're All the Same in the Dark. But it does have a feel that would also wouldn't be too far off being on an album such as Perpendicular or Abandoned. So there we go. And of course, then there's, again, as far as the really laid back stuff that I really dig, one of the really good laid back songs on here is Nothing at All. This one is very interesting to me, is because of, for one, as far as the guitar playing from Steve Morse and the way that it's, I mean, it's got a real good laid back feel where you can just kick back and relax to. It's got that kind of feel, and I dig that. But the one thing that definitely somewhat really that strikes at me is just the playing. For some reason, Steve Morse is playing on here. For some reason, reminds me a little bit of Vinnie Moore. It just gives off a little bit of that feel here. Very, very much remind me some of the material off the UFO album Conspiracy of Stars from 2015. That kind of feel, and it's definitely a highlight for me off this one. As far as when it comes to representing the more heavier material of this album, that goes, of course, to songs such as No Need to Shout, Remission Possible, and even, of course, And the Address. Definitely being on the heavier side, And the Address being a cover. Maybe that isn't really the heaviest song on here, but as far as just straight up rockin' material, but to me, for sure, Remission Possible and No Need to Shout are definitely the two of the, at least that pushes it to being somewhat heavy. Especially when it comes to, of course, Remission Possible. It's an instrumental, probably the first of the instrumentals on here besides the re-recording of And the Address. But Remission Possible has a heavy feel, of course, with Don Airey's very heavy Hammond organ sound, which then would have one really reminded at least of that classic era of Deep Purple. Well, actually, we'll have one reminded, and it just has a cool way of feeling. I mean, this song also wouldn't be too far off on an album such as Perpendicular or even Abandoned. It would not be too far off. It's just, again, it's got a fucking cool feel, and I definitely dig this track. And again, but the thing is, Remission Possible does kind of come after Power of the Moon. I mean, Remission Possible kind of ends up being the song that, again, comes in after Power of the Moon, and of course then leads into, of course, Man Alive. Man Alive's interesting. This is a interesting fucking track. This is definitely straight up prog here, but cool kind of prog. I mean, the way it starts off is so very almost ambient and avant-garde-like with all the, just the effects and so on. You can hear almost a very almost sci-fi-ish as well, the way it just comes off them with them symphonic elements adding into it. But again, it just creates a level of ambience, and it just has a way of just building and just again almost grandiose as well, before then again breaks into a great guitar riff, which actually reminds me a little bit of Sunbeam off of Gillan's Double Trouble for this track. It just has that kind of feel, and even also wouldn't be too far off even off of Perfect Strangers, in my opinion. But the reason it gives us its prog is that the way it's just a stop, build up, and then stop again, and that's when we lead into of course that spoken word part of which at least goes on for at least two halves of this song here. I mean, we have after this track, which only lasts at least maybe a minute or 2 minutes or so before then we get this fucking part of where Ian Gillan all of a sudden starts giving this spoken narrative of Mother Nature and how it's a vacuum and so on, which again just part of again Ian Gillan's quirkiness and so on, which is it's just interesting, and it's one of the things that just sticks out to me, but in a very interesting way, and it's definitely at first it almost throws me off. It threw me off a little bit because of, again, it has a way of challenging the listener. But eventually, every listen, it just grows and grows. And I've actually, again, it's becoming one of my favorite songs on this album. And if anything, this is the best of the 3 singles that were released for this album. This is my favorite, at least, of the singles. Again, it's just got a cool feel to it. I just love the atmosphere of this song, and it's definitely it's grown to be one of my just a great Deep Purple track here, especially with the Steve Morse era. But again, just a great track here. As far as other highlights on here, I also dig the booginess of songs such as What the What, which is, again, for some reason, this one also reminds me of something that won't be too far off of any of Gillan's solo albums, especially in the 1980s. Especially, it wouldn't be too far off an album such as Mr. Universe or fucking Glory Road. It wouldn't be too far off of any of those 2 albums for me. It just has a cool boogie rock feel to it. Definitely classic stuff. Even also won't be too far off, even off of Whitesnake album, which almost kind of reminded me a little bit. For some reason, I was thinking, it's like, is this Ian Gillan's attempt at trying a classic blues rock era or boogie blues era Whitesnake track? But the more I then think of it, he did these kind of stuff as well during the Gillan albums in the 1980s. Or at least the early 80s during that whole new wave of British heavy metal movement. And again, it's a track that I do dig. But before I really go into anything else about my small criticism of this album, I do have to talk about the song "The Long Way Road." Now, this does have, again, it's another very cool, well, laid back, but it still has a boogie feel to it, but in very cool ways, and not bad ways. I actually do dig this track, but the biggest takeaway from this song has to be one of the lyrics in this track, and I haven't seen anybody, I've read plenty of reviews on this album. I don't know, I haven't watched many video reviews, but even when I watched Martin Popoff's review that he did for Banger TV, the one thing I didn't have, and I don't know, I guess to some people, nobody thought much of it. It wasn't much to talk home to, to basically to walk home with. But it is something that really just stood out to me, and it's the one lyric on this track. It's the one lyric and it's like almost, it's right after the guitar solo, at least from Steve Morse, and of course, again, just the play-by-play, again, trading off work between Steve Morse and Don Airey. After this, there's a little calm part, a little, again, almost kind of slight, almost grandiose build where it even has a little bit of that symphonic stuff kind of being brought back into this track. But during this part of the track, which is, again, real later in the song, there's one lyric on here, and my eyes popped as I heard this lyric here. It's where he goes, "I promised myself I would not get trashed again." God damn it, do I fucking love Ian Gillan. Because for anybody, if this felt dry and didn't really it didn't really do much for any of the listeners, and it just was one of those that just flew in one ear and out the other, and basically for sure made the listeners not think much of it and just thought of another lyric. To me, if anybody was ever familiar with the whole history surrounding, of course, Deep Purple and Ian Gillan himself, this lyric is obviously a play on, of course, the classic lyric, and of course, Black Sabbath's "Trash." That, of course, Mr. Miracle, I would not get trashed again. I wouldn't. Yeah, it's obviously a pure fucking nod to, of course, "Trashed" from Black Sabbath. That whole lyric, I promised myself I would not get trashed again, is obviously a big fucking a nod to, of course, the time of Ian Gillan and Black Sabbath. That to me just completely even made the record for me, because of, my God, he's referencing a Black Sabbath track that he at least helped come up with in a Deep Purple album, on a fucking Deep Purple track. That right there completely just, it definitely made the record for me, and it definitely is why I, in many ways, will highlight The Long Way Road as well for this album. Just definitely a brilliant play from, of course, and just from Ian Gillan here. And again, only for those who are hardcore fucking Ian Gillan fans, for sure, that definitely would be one lyric I am surprised. I'm surprised that, for sure, that flew over everybody's heads. I'm surprised it did, because of it's again, Trash was one of my favorite songs off of the Born Again album from Black Sabbath, and that lyric is just one of those, again, lyrics that definitely have stood in my brain. And again, I've always memorized every bit of the lyrics of that track. I mean, it's goofy stuff from Ian Gillan, but I just really, it just warms my heart to actually hear that kind of lyric, or at least him referencing that song in this Deep Purple album. I just love that. It definitely warms my heart, for sure. But there we go. That's all the most of the highlights. I mean, The Power of the Moon, like, again, is one of the more experimental songs off this one. Again, this one does have a bit of a Pink Floyd-y feel to it. I wasn't very much, again, when hearing this track, I knew of at least of prog rock. It had a prog rock feel to it, and a very proggy feel, but I wasn't thinking of which band until then re-listening, and then finally hit me. It was Pink Floyd. Definitely not a bad track. Definitely one of those that definitely grown on me. Finally, let's get, since with all the highlights I've given towards the sound of the songs and the stuff I was really receptive towards, it's time to at least talk about a little bit of my nitpicking on this album. As far as songs, I've said it. I'm not too much fond of the song "Throw My Bones." It's a fine opener, but it really isn't the best song on this album for me. I mean, yes, it's different, it's interesting, it's definitely Deep Purple really kind of, again, branching out a little bit and really starting to challenge the listeners a bit, especially in their age. I mean, it's already been kind of noted that that they don't feel like to remake, or make another heavy record. They've done all of that. So basically, stuff like this, I get it. I get why they want to try and do something different. But the thing is, I'm not too crazy about this song. I mean, it's okay when it's on. But the thing is, if I'm gonna start throwing in any songs from this album on any, let's say, playlist or anything, I'm not gonna really throw My Bones. It's not a track I'm gonna go back to and re-listen all the way through. It's just fine when it's on, but it's not really the best song off this album. It's definitely good for a single, but it's not very good when it comes to representing at least some of the other songs off this album. But I get it. It's a decent track. The other track I've got a little bit. It's a grower, but I'm still not feeling that crazy about. It's the song "Step by Step." This song does remind me of something off of Perpendicular. At least that one track off of Perpendicular, which I'm kind of starting to forget a bit. Which would be. Soon Forgotten. That's what Step by Step kind of reminds me a bit of the song Soon Forgotten off of, for sure, Perpendicular, but not nearly as cool and as catchy as that track. It doesn't have a little bit, it kind of, again, it's one of those that just feels flat in some aspects, even though it's got similarities to, of course, that track, but it's not really anywhere as close to being as the brilliance of Soon Forgotten off of Perpendicular. But it's close to there, but not really as much. But it's an okay track, but it's not really the best song of this one as well. So I think I pretty much already covered it. And then, of course, we have, of course, as far as my other nitpicking for this album, it's also, I was alluding to it when I was talking about Bob Ezrin's production work. I've already heard, I think I've read one review really knock down the production on this one, and it's more so for the fact that the guitar is so mixed low, at least on this album. If you got a good pair of headphones, you really can hear the guitar, but it's got such a... It's definitely a overdriven guitar tone, but for some reason, because of how smooth and clean that Bob Ezrin's production work in, I mean his mixing. One of the other thing is Ian Gillan's vocals. I love his I love Ian Gillan. He's again one of my favorite vocalists of all time. But I feel he's way too up in the mix on this album. He's so up in the mix that it almost becomes at times a little bit unbearable at times. Even though it's not too bad, but he is very up in the mix. That the one reason I also really dig some of the stuff with Martin Birch and Roger Glover is that they knew how to balance in the mixing and knew what should be up in the mix and what should be down. Again, Bob Ezrin is a great fucking producer. He did amazing work with the Alice Cooper and, of course, even Kiss. And to some extent, Pink Floyd. But he knew what to work with those bands. For some reason, him working with Deep Purple, it seemed interesting on paper, but hearing this album, I think he could have turned up the guitars a little bit because of, and should have knew how to balance at least a bit of it. And the thing is, Roger Glover's guitar track is so far left on the ear that even in many ways, even how loud you got that guitar track up, it does in many ways get drowned out by, of course, Ian Gillan and, of course, Don Airey's keyboard work, which is fantastic on this album. Don Airey is fantastic on this record. He definitely, like I've said before, he is probably the best pick that Deep Purple at least gotten. He was definitely at least if they really had to get anybody that would have replaced John Lord, I think Don Airey was a great pick, and I'm definitely hearing his work. He's a great fucking fit. He definitely fits right in. His keyboard work on here is fantastic. He definitely, again, he's a great fucking keyboard player here. I didn't really think about much of that when his work with, again, Michael Schenker Group, Ozzy Osbourne, and Rainbow. But he was great on some of those albums with those guys. He was great on those. But hearing him on here it makes me appreciate him much more. But as much of the praise I will give Don Airey, I don't think I want to hear him overpower a lot of the other guys on this album, especially Steve Morse, who is definitely a good guitar player. He's got his own feel. He's definitely Steve Morse. He's not Ritchie Blackmore, and he's definitely not Tommy Bolin. He's Steve Morse. And he's definitely a good guitar player. I do like his work a little bit better here with Deep Purple than I actually kind of do with the Dixie Dregs. But that's just my opinion. But I think it's a little bit of a shame that his guitar tone and his track is definitely mixed a little bit low. It should have been a little bit rose up a little bit, and it should have been a little bit more closer, like somewhere the middle in. Bob Ezrin, I think, in many ways, mixed him a little bit too low on this album to where it almost becomes to where you can't at times really make out what he's really playing, and it gets drowned out by it. I mean, this is great fucking production here. This is, at least for a modern record, this is a very much a perfect mix and production. When it comes to a rock record, especially when it comes to Deep Purple, for those, you expect to hear the guitar at least raised up a little bit more in the mix because of he's again, it's classic rock in many ways. It's rock. He did great with Alice Cooper, especially some of the previous stuff from Alice Cooper, especially Paranormal. The guitars are definitely up in the mix and definitely have a great balance, but for some reason here, it just sounds weird, and I don't think I think that they should have mixed up a little bit and should have really balanced out some of the mixing on this album, in my opinion. But it's not bad, but it's not terrible either. But that is definitely one of my, at least, just some of my nitpicks of this record. With all that, as far as the other, if I have to really talk about one other highlight, again, the song And the Address is a great fucking re-recording. And again, it's a great re-recording, and I think they did fine at just preserving the track that it is in many ways. They definitely took care of this in many ways, what can be considered a obscure track for, of course, again, Ritchie Blackmore and John Lord, who again were definitely were the writers, at least, for this song, and the composers. But there we go. There is Whoosh from Deep Purple. My rating, I almost felt like at first, I definitely felt like giving it a rating, and I am giving it a rating. But there was a little while I almost felt like I wasn't. That's because of, I'll eventually will then get to that. But my rating is actually a 8.50 out of 10. I think besides the small complaints, this is a solid album from these guys. And again, for the 21st studio album, this is definitely a great full-length album from, of course, Deep Purple. But the thing I was about to get into, why I didn't feel like giving it a rating at some point, why I almost didn't feel like to, for a little while, just for a little while, is the fact that there's a lot of hints that this could very well be the final Deep Purple album. I mean, 21 albums and a long fucking career. I mean, that's why I said at the beginning of this review that Deep Purple have a monolith career, why they are a monolith, and why that is the best description of Deep Purple. Definitely one of the biggest bands that definitely were one of the pioneers for, again, the heavy metal genre, and especially they were pioneers. And that is, and if this is the final record, I don't think this completely hurts any of their legacy. I think, anything, this is just a nice farewell to, of course, the fans. If this is a nice farewell in many ways to, of course, its audience. I mean, the music here, no, it ain't Machine Head. It ain't Deep Purple and Rock. It sure, or of course, ain't Burn, and it definitely ain't Perfect Strangers. It for sure isn't also albums such as Fireball, or for even in many ways, even Stormbringer. But this is still a fine, solid record for what it is. And in that case, and in many ways, with all that said, if this is, I mean, I was about to say, I mean, though they are not those albums. I mean, many people do expect Deep Purple to put out, at least when it comes to every bit of their favorite bands, they want to end their career on a smoker. They want on a scorcher, a album that is a banger. They want to, again, go out on top. But in this case, Deep Purple definitely seemed to kind of give you the reality that that's not always the case. They want to end out the way that they want to end out, and in some cases, just end out the way they do, as a comfortably band. That's all. Just a laid back, comfortable fucking band. Because in many ways, like I think it's been stated, they've done everything. They felt like I've done everything, and I'm like, this shows they've done everything. It's just, again, it's all meant as a way for at least a farewell to the diehard listeners who still at least come in and support Deep Purple and have supported them through all the different eras that they've went through, all the lineups. This is basically, as many ways, is seen as a farewell. It's not, again, I know for some people want to expect them to end on a spectacular note, something that's like, oh my god, a great hard rocker, but not always the case. And the thing is, that's something I think people have to come to realization with. And I think it's a fine record from Deep Purple. I think it's a solid album from them. It ain't, again, it's not the classic records, but it's still, at least the Steve Morse era, which again lasts for at least 7 records, this is a fine album. So again, this album has been out since August 7th. And since then, I know many people have definitely heard this album. So with that, definitely let me know what your thoughts are. This was a long review, but given for what the career that is Deep Purple, and given all the stuff surrounding it, I definitely had a lot to talk about the sound for sure. So with that, I hope you all stayed within this video. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed. This is for Thrash Sam out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.